Hello, BookTube. We start today our February 2019 read-along of Anthony Trollope's 1873 novel, The Eustace Diamonds. This is the third book in what is called his Palliser or parliamentary novels, even though the main focus of the story has nothing to do with most of the characters that we've known in the first two books that we've read along together in this series. And that's the nature of the Palliser series, until shortly after this book, when all of a sudden they start to become much closer to what we would consider to be books in a series. But the first few, it was not in Trollope's mind. He claims that it was, but I don't believe it. It was not in his mind to make these any kind of a series in a conjoined kind of way. It was more like he wanted to just revisit happenings in the same imagined universe. And that's the right way to approach this, because otherwise you're going to be frustrated. And Trollope doesn't do anything to help with that frustration, because in the course of this book, at the beginning, in the first 20 chapters that we're reading today, he outright says that none of the people that he's talking about are going to be either the hero or the villain of this book, and that the hero or the heroine will occur later and won't be the focus of the book. It's an author who's at the height of his confidence who can say such a thing to his readers and expect them to come back for more. And that's exactly true of when this book was being serialized. Trollope was at the height of his powers. He was a wealthy author, and he was a household name. People knew what to expect from a Trollope novel. And he had hyperfine antenna for such things, and was starting to realize in the early 1870s that that very factor of being so predictable, so familiar, was starting to hurt him. Starting to hurt what we would call in the 21st century his brand. He was starting to go out of fashion, and one of the things that was in fashion literarily at the time was something closer to what we would consider to be a thriller. It was called a sensation novel, where the plot revolves around something outre, unusual, where it's no longer the kind of patient examination of contemporary sensibilities and relationships and personal arcs moving towards a series of marriages, but rather that there's something odd, something dramatic at the center of the story. And Trollope was adaptable. It doesn't seem that he doesn't have that reputation today, but he was adaptable to the demands of the marketplace and decided to try his hand at something like that with this book, which sits oddly in the procession of Palliser novels, because it is a Trollope attempt at a sensation novel, and I think a really good one. We don't get to that so much in the first 20 chapters that we're reading today. In the first 20 chapters, we are introduced to our cast of characters, including Lizzie Greystock, the daughter of a rakehell old admiral who loved wine and women, and who Trollope tells us may even have had wine and women with him on his deathbed. He leaves Lizzie with no money, and she goes into the care of an impoverished old countess, Lady Linlithgow, who was just a member of the extended family, and who hates Lizzie, hates everyone. And she is also, for a countess, as Trollope puts it, for a countess, she's poor as Job. But she has a house in London, and that's all that Lizzie cares about. And she takes her in with the express purpose of launching her into the world and getting her a husband. Trollope describes Lizzie Greystock right away. This book, I'll be of course eager to hear what your own impressions are. But this book, rereading it for this read along, I was reminded of something that I always forget, and I'm always pleased to notice when I reread it, which is that it hits the ground at a dead run. Usually Trollope sort of sits back in his chair and interlaces his fingers on his stomach and clears his throat quite a bit before he starts in with what he wants to tell you. It's all very comfortable by the fireside with claret on the table. And he doesn't do that in this book at all, even though at one point he does claim that he does this. At one point, where is it here? He actually steps out of the narrative for a minute and says, dramatists, when they write their plays, have a delightful privilege of prefixing a list of their personages, and the dramatists of old who used to tell us who was in love with whom, and what the blood relationship of all the persons was. In such a In such a narrative as this, any proceedings of that kind would be unusual, and therefore the poor narrator has been driven to expend his first 4 chapters in the mere task of introducing his characters. He regrets the length of these introductions and will now begin at once the action of this story. I don't believe there's a single one of you who read those first 4 chapters and felt like your patience was being taxed. Those first 4, Trollope is apologizing for introducing these people before he launches into his story, but the introductions are so wonderful that you don't want them to stop, much less for the story to start. And also, if you took the sensational elements out of this story, the stuff that's going to come up later on after that apology, if you took those out of the story completely and just made it what we would consider a normal Trollope novel, it would work just fine. All that we're going to get is extra. There's already a perfectly workable plot, a perfectly workable novel in embryo in those first 4 chapters. And in those first 4 chapters, we meet our characters. And Lizzie Greystock is the main one of those. She dominates this book, and Trollope can't stand her. He doesn't hate her in the way that for instance, her own aunt hates her. But he doesn't let her get away with anything. She is a charmer. She is beautiful. And after a successful, disreputable season in London, where she has to unpawn her finest jewelry in order to make herself look attractive enough to wed someone, and unpawns the jewelry by telling the pawnbrokers that she plans to wed someone. It's all so horrible and iniquitous. And she does wed someone. She weds Sir Eustace, who is young and beautiful and somewhat vapid and a little bit on the mean side, we're told, and also dying. He's also dying. And he tells her that. And she's okay with it. And they go on a honeymoon to Italy, and he dies. He dies before he ever gets back. We don't know anything more of him than that. He dies, and suddenly Lizzie Eustace, as we will now call her, Lady Eustace, the widow of a baronet, is set for life. She not only has a large amount of money, but she also has a lifetime rights to the Eustace home on the coast, a Eustace family country home on the coast that she can use for her own for the rest of her life, which you'd think would gratify anyone who had been as poor as she was in the household of Lady Linlithgow in London, and who'd come from nothing and had the right to expect nothing. And yet, it isn't enough for Lizzie. Even from the beginning, it's not enough for Lizzie. And right away in those first 4 chapters, the question of the Eustace diamonds comes up. In the very beginning of the book that we're talking about, it's still in the background just a little. It becomes the focus of the whole book, and it starts to really pick up steam in the very last chapter of the 20 that we're reading today, because they are family heirlooms. It's an opulently amazing necklace of diamonds that is worth more than all the money that Sir Eustace left to Lizzie. On its own, it is. And the reason that there's trouble is because the Eustace family views them as family property, something that Eustace had no legal authority to give to his wife. She claims that he did, and that they belong to her, not the family. The family doesn't think so. The family thinks of it more like we would consider today a noble family in England, for instance, might have a Landseer on the wall of their country estate that had been there for 170 years. The current Duke, who owns that house, would not be able to sell that Landseer. It would belong to the estate. It wouldn't belong to him. And that is the legal question. That is the big brouhaha that will animate the bulk of this novel. Although, because we're talking about Lizzie Eustace, her maneuverings in London will also animate the bulk of this novel. The main thing that we get at the beginning of this book is twofold. First, we get that whole panorama of people involved, because most of Lizzie's relations, Lady Linlithgow notwithstanding, most of her relations are far humbler than her now exalted state, and far more decent. No one is universally praised, but most of the people in the book aren't like her. They aren't moral vacuities. For instance, the other woman at the beginning of the story, Lucy Morris, is a simp. She's big basset hound eyes and a pleasant face, and likes to laugh and likes to be pleasant to everyone. And she is kind of a parody of a normal Victorian heroine. Of course, the main character, the character that Trollope in these early parts of this book, the main characters that he's pining to write about aren't anything like Lizzie Greystock, and they aren't anything like Lucy Morris. There are two of them, Madame Max and Lady Glen, both of whom we met in Phineas Finn, and you can tell, if you have an ear for Trollope's writing, you can tell that he's just eager to get to them. He just hasn't, but he's eager to get to them, and they will be the real stars of this book. He pretty much says it in this introduction. But in her way, Lady Useless, Lizzie starts to attract all kinds of unsavory people, and we get a whole bunch of them in the first 20 chapters, and we're going to get to know a lot more of them. And the Eustace family lawyer, Mr. Camperdown, becomes a fascinating character in his own right and doesn't seem to understand what he's dealing with. He does, in every level, recognize what Lizzie Eustace is. Just like we're told her poor husband. We're told that in very little time after their marriage, he knew what she was. I love when Trollope uses phrases like that. So that is going to be one part of what we will read for the rest of the book. Is the main part will be the story of Lizzie Eustace and the diamonds, and all kinds of maneuverings, because she has an unbearable chokehold on the Eustace family, because she came back from Italy pregnant and has delivered the heir to the family. So she's all important to them because of that. Otherwise, she would be far easier for them to deal with. But their family name, their family line is going to continue through her son. So that is the big main part of the book. But because this is a Palliser novel, a parliamentary novel, there's also a political element that runs in the background throughout the whole book. Because a couple of the people involved that we meet in these early chapters are a couple of the menfolk involved are in Parliament. And they aren't bad people by any means. Most of the men that we will meet in the course of this book, most of the major characters, there'll be minor ones that have regional accents, poor people accents, but most of the major characters we meet are in Parliament. So it becomes an important part of the book. And early on, in the 20 chapters that we read today, Trollope gives a fantastic little aria. I swear, he had to know when he was writing the Eustace Diamonds, he had to know that long political disquisitions are exactly what his readers were expecting. It's the kind of thing he was trying to work against in this book. He was trying to work against writing just another Trollope novel, because he was starting to worry that was making him something that readers could pass on and that wouldn't attract new readers. And that's deadly in the marketplace. Keep in mind, this guy was living by his pen. So it was important for him to know that, and deadly. It would have been deadly for him to ignore it. But he can't help himself, and when he writes about politics, he does such a great job. I mean, look, remember back to Phineas Finn. Remember how much the purely political parts of not only a political system that was foreign to most of you, but that was foreign to everyone in terms of time. Not only was it the political system of England, but it was the political system of England from 150 years ago. But remember how interesting those parts were. Trollope is just really good at it. And at the beginning of this book, he gives, just as a matter of course, he's talking about how the Eustace family, the people connected with the Eustace family are just ordinarily conservatives. And he gives a little aria of what conservatism is that I swear could stand today with virtually no alteration. He talks, where is it here? All interference with prerogative has been bad. The Reform Bill was very bad. Encroachment on the estates of the bishops was bad. Emancipation of the Roman Catholics was the worst of all. Abolition of corn laws, church rates, and oaths and tests were all bad. The meddling of universities has been grievous. The treatment of the Irish Church has been satanic. The overhauling of schools is the most injurious to English education. Education bills and Irish land bills were all bad. Every step taken has been bad. And yet to them, the conservatives, Old England is of all the countries in the world the best to live in, and is not at all the less comfortable because of the changes that have been made. These people are ready to grumble at every boon conferred on them, and yet to enjoy every boon. They know, too, their privileges, and after a fashion understand their position. It is picturesque, and it pleases them. To have been always in the right, and yet always on the losing side, always being ruined, always under persecution from a wild spirit of republican demagogism, and yet never to lose anything, not even position or public esteem, is pleasant enough. A huge, living, daily increasing grievance that does one no palpable harm is the happiest possession that a man can have. That is genius. Absolute genius. And that is Trollope's declaration that now we will begin the plot notwithstanding. That is a fair summary of the beginning of this book, is that Lizzie Eustace is going to start to come to grief both in the marriage mart and in her stubborn decision not to yield up the diamonds. So we see a lot of stuff. We travel around to Portray Castle and meet a lot of other people. But that is the gist of these first 20 chapters, which manage to start at a breakneck speed, and yet I think are incredibly comfortable as an introduction. And I think partly the reason for that is because it's so personality driven. A lot of Trollope novels, that doesn't feel the case. It feels like he is chemically crafting an atmosphere, and the atmosphere is just what you will breathe in the course of the book. In other words, not character driven. And in this, right from the beginning, with Lizzie Greystock, we get characters who are drawn almost as caricatures, because Trollope has not made the mistake of falling in love with any of them. We get later on some characters that he does love, and they are wonderfully portrayed, but in a completely different way. The tenor changes completely. These people, Trollope can take or leave, and Lizzie herself, he compares her to Becky Sharp, who is, the quintessential embodiment of this kind of character, this kind of shark-eyed, trimming climber of a character. But when he describes her, he gives a long description of what Lizzie Greystock looks like. Trollope always loves to describe his female characters. He loves to describe them more than he does his male characters. The male characters get a couple of lines. She gets a couple of paragraphs. And he immediately, when he isn't 2 seconds describing her before he's talking about Lady Macbeth. so that is it. That is our beginning for the Eustace Diamonds. I want to know what you think, especially if you have followed along the last 2 Trollope read-alongs that we've done. Did you notice that the tone of this thing seems completely different? Because believe me, Trollope wanted you to feel that way. If you did notice a change in tone, he wanted you to feel that this was not a normal Trollope novel. He wanted to sort of shake the dust off his own literary reputation. I think it works. I don't think it reads like a Trollope novel at all at the beginning. It gets more Trollopean as it goes along. But I want to know what you thought, especially if you've read those first 2 books. And of course, I want to know what you think of Lizzie Greystock. I don't imagine that any of you love her, but I want to know what you think of her. And I also, it might also be interesting for me to know, especially those of you who haven't read much in the way of Victorian literature, and who are maybe just indulging me by reading this now, but who have read contemporary fiction. I'd love to hear from some of you, if you're in that position, what you think about a narrator, Trollope, simply telling you things the way he does. He makes it clear at the beginning that he doesn't like this character, and he doesn't trust her, wouldn't trust her not to pick his own pocket. And he talks directly to you a lot about the fact that you are reading a novel. And I think if a 21st century novelist did that, it would ruin the novel. It would break some sort of new spell that we characterize novels as casting. And I don't think it ruins anything here. And I'm wondering if you think the same thing. What do you think of that? Especially those of you who, for instance, are not familiar with Vanity Fair or Tom Jones, where the narrator very much reaches into the story and to talk to you about the story, so that you're never encouraged to think that you're reading a novel, that you're experiencing a story. You are always encouraged to remember that you're reading a novel. Trollope loses his willingness to do that as this book goes on, but he does it at the beginning. What did you think of that? Did it bother you? But anyway, that is the Eustace Diamonds for now. I had a wonderful time rereading it, just wonderful. And we will be back next Sunday to talk about the next 20 chapters. The book is 80 chapters long, so it's very neat to do in 1 month. So we'll just do 20 chapters a week. So the next 20 chapters, we'll come back and talk next week. And in the meantime, I will wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.